So, on the bench today is something a little different than I usually have on the channel. Yes, everyone, it's a nice old pocket watch. This particular watch was made in 1912 by the Elgin National Watch Company, which was located in Elgin, Illinois. They were quite a prolific watch manufacturer and is famous for having produced over half the pocket watches made within the US. The movement has 15 jewels and sits in an open-face pendant-style case. As with most modern mechanical watches, it is wound and set using the crown. This particular watch was actually quite common, with over 320,000 produced with this configuration. The movement is quite dirty. However, it is in decent enough shape to run, but just barely. I'll perform a full service to this watch, which includes disassembly, a thorough cleaning of the movement, reassembly, lubrication, and testing. To start, I'll remove the movement from the case. This is accomplished by removing the 2 case screws. We then pull out the crown, open both sides of the case, and gently lift the movement out through the front. The dial on this watch is in remarkably good condition, as there are no chips or cracks in the porcelain. Next, the hands must be removed. To keep the dial in good shape, I'll use an empty Ziploc bag. This also helps in keeping the hands from suddenly popping off and flying across the room. They are extremely delicate and must be handled carefully to avoid damaging them. Whoa. Okay, come on back here. There we go. We'll use the same procedure to remove the second hand. It really is quite astonishing to see how well preserved this dial is, especially something as old as this one. I mean, 1912, that's the same year the Titanic sank. But anyway, so now we're going to go ahead and remove the dial. We have to remove this protective ring first. Then we loosen 3 screws that hold the dial in place. After that, the dial can be gently pulled off the front of the movement. Oh, did you see that part fall off? I didn't notice it at the time, but that is the dial washer, which helps keep the hour wheel in place on the movement. And that's the hour wheel. So, moving on, the next thing we need to do is remove the balance. This is accomplished by removing the screw, the singular screw, that is holding the bridge down. I must stress here, any operation with or near the balance must be done very carefully. It is very delicate, especially the hairspring, and one of the most important assemblies within a watch, and we definitely do not want to damage it. Once we get the bridge loose, the balance can be carefully lifted out using a pair of tweezers. This really can be a nerve-wracking operation. I'll just set that out of the way for safekeeping. So with that out of our hair, we can continue the disassembly. Next is to remove the wheels responsible for winding the watch. A few key notes about watchmaking, and clockmaking or horology in general, are observation, patience, and care. Take note of where each part is located, how it is oriented, what its function is, and how to safely remove it. Experience also guides you with the disassembly of a watch, like with this particular wheel here. The screw holding it down uses a left-handed thread. If I were to try forcing it too hard in the wrong direction, the screw head can snap right off, causing a much bigger headache of having to figure out how to remove the rest of it. A good common practice is to examine each part as you remove it. Sometimes what may appear to be one part could actually be 2, such as this wheel here. The center of the wheel sits stationary, while the outer portion rotates. Always examine each part for damage as well, because a damaged part can stop you dead in your tracks and force you to reassess the next steps. Now we can remove the train bridge to gain access to the train wheels. The wheels hiding under this bridge have very tiny pivots, and prone to breakage if tweaked too much, so this must be done carefully. Well, I suppose it's fair to say that extreme care must always be taken while working on a watch. When removing any of the bridges, the best method is to first pry it up in multiple places using a screwdriver, which helps loosen it up. Then you can grab it with a pair of tweezers and lift it off. I always check the underside of the bridge to make sure there aren't parts hiding underneath, or to see if any of the wheels were stuck inside the pivot holes. As I attempted to lift the wheels out, I discovered that they cannot be removed without removing the barrel bridge first, so that will be next. It was at this point I also realized how carried away I got with the disassembly and, well, I forgot to use my trusty movement holder. That's much better. This provides a much more rigid platform to work off of. And then I finally noticed the dial washer by my left hand. So now we can continue. The barrel bridge should have been removed first. However, in my defense, every watch is constructed a little different. This is a prime example of one of the points I made earlier about observation being an important part of watchmaking. That is, try to see how the watch is constructed and plan from there. With the barrel bridge removed, you can now get a good look at the train of wheels running from the mainspring all the way down to the escape wheel. Now we can start carefully removing the wheels and other parts, starting with the mainspring and barrel, then the winding stem assembly, the third wheel, the fourth wheel, and finally the escape wheel. You'll notice I can't remove the center wheel, since we need to remove the cannon pinion on the dial side of the movement, which is where the minute hand attaches. I'll use my handy dandy cannon pinion remover, which is the safest and easiest way to remove it. This operation really should have been done towards the beginning of the disassembly, but I think I was just excited to finally be doing a video on watches and, well, I overlooked this step. But now we have the center wheel removed and can move on to removing the pallet fork. The pallet fork is extraordinarily fragile and very easy to bend or break. There are two tiny little jewels that act as the pallets for the escapement and can be broken or dislodged with even the slightest push in the wrong direction. And I'm sure this goes without saying, but extreme care must be taken while handling it. First we remove the pallet bridge, then we carefully remove the pallet fork and set that somewhere very safe. Now we can work on removing the keyless works. In the early days of watches, you had to use a small winding key to wind the watch as well as adjust the hands. So as the name implies, these parts allow you to set the hands without the use of a key, and instead you use the crown. It uses a set of levers and springs that are set in a specific way, and there are quite a few varieties that were put into practice. So I always make sure to snap a quick photo of this setup to make sure I can get this back together with minimal effort. As I'm sure you can imagine, the keyless works was a monumental step forward in making a watch much more user-friendly. Now I'm sure you've noticed by now that there are quite a few different screws used here, and you might be wondering how I keep track of them. To be honest, I really don't. The reason for that is every screw is designed for a specific part or purpose, and you eventually start to get a bit of a sixth sense of where they go after a while. Anyway, we're down to the last couple of parts. We removed this little bridge, and hiding underneath is an intermediate wheel that interacts with the motion works to allow the hands to be set. Once this wheel is removed, then we're pretty much done with the disassembly. Now we can carefully reattach the balance assembly in preparation for cleaning. This helps protect it during the cleaning process. When doing this, we want to make sure the balance wheel is seated properly between the bridge and the plate. This is done by periodically checking that the wheel rotates freely before we tighten down the bridge screw. Otherwise, we risk breaking the pivots, which, as I'm sure you can imagine, is super bad news. One last thing before cleaning. We need to remove the mainspring from the barrel. First, we remove the barrel cap, and then the barrel arbor. Now we can gently remove the mainspring from the barrel by uncoiling it like so. The trick here is to let it uncoil slowly, so it doesn't pop out and slap you in the face before flying across the room. And right there near the end, it popped out and fell on the floor. Well, no harm done though. Now we can start loading the parts into the cleaning baskets. You'll notice I'm also using some small baskets for the screws and extra tiny parts, as well as the super fragile parts such as the pallet fork. From there, we stack the parts into the main basket, then put the movement plate with the balance wheel in the last section, then put the top on to contain everything. After that, it's time to run it through the cleaning machine. This cleaning machine is a vintage one from the mid-1950s and was acquired last year by sheer happenstance from a former colleague who said it may or may not be functional. As luck would have it, I was able to get it going relatively quickly and has become an invaluable tool, both for watches as well as some clocks. I'll run the parts through 4 cycles, a cleaning cycle followed by 2 rinse cycles, then the dryer. My machine doesn't oscillate back and forth like others you may have seen. However, it has a manual reversing switch that is used halfway through each cycle. This one was made prior to the auto-reversing models that came after it, but it performs the job admirably and is a tried and true old design. While the parts are drying, we can turn our attention to cleaning the dial. I use lukewarm water and a Q-tip, rather than using solvents or cleaners, as it's the simplest, safest, and least invasive way to clean these. And here's the results. Just check out how well this dial looks now. With the parts out of the dryer, I carefully remove them from the baskets and set them out in preparation for reassembly. This is quite a gratifying process, as I get to inspect and see how well the parts cleaned up. And here are the results. Everything cleaned up perfectly, and you can see how shiny the parts are. This is looking great so far. Now on to the reassembly. For this portion of the service, I'll use finger cots to protect the parts from skin oils, as well as keep oils and grease off my fingers during lubrication. As you might imagine, the reassembly process is much more tedious than the disassembly, especially due to the fact that some parts must be lubricated before moving on to another portion of the assembly. Anyway, the balance assembly is removed, and after placing it onto a balance tack, I'll put this out of the way until we're ready for it later on. Next, we'll turn our attention to the mainspring. This one has obviously been replaced at some point, as the original one would have been blued steel and wouldn't have the S-curve at the end like this one has. So in this instance, we can reinstall this one using another vintage tool, the mainspring winder. However, before we can do that, we must lubricate it using some Mobius 8300 spring grease. It doesn't take much, just a dab on your fingers and spread it forth and back on the mainspring. As I mentioned a minute ago, this is a vintage winder made by Marshall, and it is specifically designed for pocket watches. When we use it, we have to make sure the mainspring is engaged properly on the winding arbor, otherwise it will not wind correctly, or at all. Once it is seated, we can put the winder together and start carefully winding it into the appropriately sized sleeve that fits this barrel. Then comes the fun part, reinstalling the mainspring. We position the end of the mainspring so it'll engage with the barrel, then we push it out with the little silver button. After that, we install the barrel arbor, then give it a twist to make sure it grabs the center of the mainspring correctly. Once everything is in place, we put a little Mobius HP 1300 onto the arbor where it fits through the cap of the barrel. We then place the cap of the barrel into its proper orientation, then press firmly to snap it into place. We flip the barrel over and, like before, use some more HP 1300 where the arbor meets the barrel. With the mainspring done, we can then move on to the winding stem assembly. With a couple of dabs of grease on the little ratchet wheels to help minimize wear due to friction, it then gets assembled and put aside at the ready so we can install it after we finish putting in the keyless works. Unfortunately, I don't have a super great camera setup to capture small details as of yet. Suffice it to say, however, the keyless works is a bit of a complicated install. We must ensure everything engages properly, and we also need to lubricate pivot points and sliding surfaces to minimize wear, as well as ensuring a smooth operation. This can be quite a tedious process, and certainly takes some time and patience to complete. Now we can install the winding stem, making sure the yoke from the keyless works engages properly with the winding pinion. After that, we can begin installing some of the train wheels, starting with the escape wheel, followed by the fourth wheel, which has a longer pivot for the second hand to attach to. Now we can install the pallet fork, making extra sure the pivots are properly seated in the pivot jewels. As I mentioned earlier, if you tighten down the bridge without making sure the pivots are engaged correctly, you can snap them right off, and we certainly don't want that to happen. Continuing with the assembly, the rest of the wheels can now be installed, starting with the mainspring and barrel. After that comes the center wheel, which needs to be lubricated prior to installing. Finally, the third wheel can be installed. Once this is in place, we can then install the barrel bridge. As with the other bridges, we have to make sure the pivots are lined up with their pivot holes before tightening down the screws. This can be tricky at times, and is always best to double check everything before securing it. This one lined up fairly well for a change, so we'll go ahead and screw it in place. You can see how I'm checking to see that power is flowing through the train. After lubricating where the mainspring arbor comes through the bridge, we can now turn our attention to the trickiest bridge of all, the train bridge. This is where all of your patience will come into practice, as attempting to line up the pivots properly will certainly test it. It is sometimes necessary to manually position them using a pair of fine-tipped tweezers. Once we've verified the power is trickling down the train as it should, we can then secure the bridge. Then, we re-verify that power is still transferring through. Next, we'll attach the winding wheel, which needs lubrication before installing. The outer portion goes in first, then the center. Remember, this is the screw that has the reverse thread. Once that is secured into place, we can then install the ratchet wheel. The square hole in the center must engage with the mainspring arbor, and we have to move the click out of the way to get it into place. After winding the watch a bit, I'll check to see that power is flowing by gently nudging the pallet fork from one side to the other to see that it flicks over each time. Once we've verified that, we can then install the balance wheel and see if the hard work has paid off. And with a quick flick, it fires right up. It's always good to see a watch start up again, and this one is really ramping up nicely. It would appear the service has been a success so far, and it's running quite well. However, we are far from finished, since we still need to do final lubrication. Using some Mobius 9010, we'll lubricate each of the pivots with the tiniest drop of oil, except for the pallet fork pivots, which don't require lubrication. We'll use some HP 1300 for the barrel arbor pivot, as it's a slightly more viscous oil that is perfect for these high tension areas, and then clean up the excess with some Rodico. As for lubricating the balance jewels, that is a tricky operation, and in this case requires us to remove the balance from the movement and actually disassemble it. Carefully, and with the aid of a balance tack, we can now slightly loosen the balance screw and gently push it out. We'll set the bridge in some Rodico to hold it, and then we'll remove the super tiny screws holding the jewels in place. And just to show, those two little dots, yeah, those are the screws. Now we can simply push out the jewels from the inside of the bridge. There are two jewels for each balance pivot, a hole jewel for the pivot to fit through, and a cap jewel for the end of the pivot to ride against. This keeps what is known as end shake, or how far the balance staff can move, to a set amount. It is vitally important these jewels be as clean as possible, so we'll put them in a solvent called 1-dip to help dissolve the old oil and dirt. After removing from the 1-dip, each jewel, especially the cap jewel, must be inspected to make sure it is totally clean. This one needs a bit more cleaning, so I'm using a toothpick to scrape away the junk. Then it's put back into the solvent for a final cleaning. After verifying the jewel is totally clean, we can then apply a tiny drop of 9010 to the center of the cap jewel. Now we can begin reinstalling the jewels. We'll first install the hole jewel, making sure it is seated all the way down. Then we can install the cap jewel, being careful to not smear the oil we just put onto it. This is a bit of a tricky operation, and definitely requires some patience. Once the jewel is seated, we can then reinstall those tiny screws. You know what's kind of scary? When this is done, we get to do the same operation all over again, this time to the other set of balance jewels, which are located on the movement plate. Since the steps are almost identical, I won't explain it again. However, please enjoy this short video montage of it anyway. While we're on this side of the movement, we might as well install the motion works. First, we'll lubricate the post the intermediate wheel sits on with some HP 1300 and then set it in place. Then we'll install this little bridge to keep it there. After that, we'll lubricate the center shaft, then press the cannon pinion back on, making sure it's seated all the way down. With that done, we can now do the last tricky operation, reattaching the balance wheel to the bridge. We must make sure the lug at the end of the hairspring is properly set into its hole on the bridge. Usually this can be a bit of a pain to accomplish, but apparently the horology gods were smiling down on me as it just happened to fall right into place with a gentle nudge. After verifying the hairspring is properly set into the regulating fork, we can then apply a tiny amount of 9010 to the impulse jewel on the roller. And with that, we're on to the home stretch, and now we can reinstall the balance to the movement. Once it's set into place, it kicks right up again. So after all that hard work, we have a working watch once again. After doing some adjustment to the balance off camera, here's how things look on the Timegrapher. Well, I'll be. Over 230 degrees of amplitude, only 0.3 milliseconds of beat error, and wow, 0 seconds loss or gain per day? That's about as perfect as one can hope for, especially in a watch of this vintage. So with that, we'll reinstall the hour wheel, then reattach the dial. Now we can put on the hour hand and press it home. Then we carefully align the minute hand and press it down as well. Once the second hand is in place, we can then reattach the protective ring and then finally reinstall the movement in its case. We'll carefully slide the movement in, making sure the stem in the case goes into place properly. Once it's seated, we'll close the front of the case and then double check that the hands have proper clearance. After that, all that is left to do is to install the case screws. And with that, we can now officially call this project done. This watch is running beautifully and will keep excellent time for its owner. I'm very happy with how this project turned out, and I'm sure the customer will be too. Thank you for coming along on this project. It really is a distinct pleasure to make these videos, and I hope you enjoyed watching this video as much as I had making it. As always, be sure to subscribe, as I have more content coming your way soon. Take care and have an amazing day.